We begin the Gemara today in the bottom of Daf Nun Gimel Amud Beis, where it says, Onus the Masnisin Hechidami, 4 lines from the bottom. It said in the Mishnah that a Yavam and Yevama, that are relations, even ba'inus, by force, still the mitzvah of Yibum is accomplished. So the question is, what's the scenario of an inus? What was the force here? So Onus the Masnisin Hechidami, what's the case? If you're going to say the case is, Kisha Onsu Oivde Kechavim, that Goyim are coming and forcing a Yavam to have relations with his Yevama against his will, and he has relations with her. But the Gemara says that's not considered to be an Einus really. Why? Because Rava says, Ein Einus la'erve. There's no halacha of an Einus by an erve that a person can say that the relations happened against his will, even if he's being forced. Because in order to have relations, it has to have his intent. The erection of the aver has to be with his intent, and therefore it's not considered to be an Einus. There's a machlekes rishonim about this. Some say that they're forcing him to have these relations, and some say they're physically forcing him. And in a case when they're physically forcing him, so ein kishay elo ledas, so therefore it's not considered to be against his will. Has to be with his intent. So over here, what's the case of the Mishnah when it says that only ba'inus will it that even ba'inus that is, it'll be considered a mitzvah. Ella, so the Gemara says the case is biyoshan. This person had relations with his Yevameh, he was sleeping. And then he had relations with her. Fragt the Gemara, in such a case, it's bechlal not, you can't say that he did a mitzvah at all, and it would be anything. Because Rav Yehuda said, Yoshan lekana bi yevimtai. A person that's asleep and in such a situation he has relations with his Yevameh, he's not kainer at all. Rashi here says, when a person is sleeping, he's not a bardas. You can't say that he did the mitzvah of Yibma, Yevama, Yava Yalel.
What's the honest also?
Again?
What's the honest?
It's considered to be an einus because it happened without his das at all. It happened without him knowing. While he was sleeping, it just happened. In such a case, the Gemara says he's not a bardas, so it can't be did a mitzvah.
Other people forced him.
Other people was forcing him while he was sleeping. Okay, so it's b'chlal not with his das. Okay, so that's the question. So that can't be the case. So the Gemara says, Elo benitka. The case over here is that he was in one place. Rashi here says he was on a let's say on the second floor, and he was prepared with his wife to have relations, and then he fell down from the place where he was, and nitka, and he had relations with his Yevama, without at all intending to, and it just happened like that. He fell down. In such a case, it's also not the mitzvah. Rabbi said about such a case, nafal min agag, if a person falls down from a roof, v'nitka, and he has relations with a Yevama, or he fell on her, or he couldn't be, he hurt her. So he says, chayiv barba dvarim. In such a case, he would be chayiv to pay her 4 different things that a person is chayiv. Rashi here brings, well, it says in the Gemara, babakam, nezek, tsar, ripuy, and sheves. If a person falls from a place, and this is, let's say, a wind blew him down, and you're talking about a wind, this has to be a ruach mitzuya, something that he could have expected to come, and therefore he went in such a place that it was basically, he should have paid attention to this, and he flew down, he's going to have to pay for nezek, he hurt her, he harmed her, and tsar, ripashev, the Gemara is soon going to bring about this more. Kopanim, that he has to pay, it's his responsibility. But in such a situation where a wind blew him down from a roof and he fell onto his Yevameh and he had relations with her, it's not kaina. He didn't at all intend for this. So in such a case, it's nothing. So that's not the case of the Einus in the Mishnah. So what's the case? Elo, the case in the Mishnah is he was preparing himself for relations with his wife. And then the takfasa yevimtai. It's the Yevameh herself that came and forced him against his will to have relations with her. So in such a case, he was aware what he's doing, that he's having relations with his Yevama, even though it was against his will, but he prepared himself to have relations with his wife, and then now his Yevama forces him. This is the case the Mishnah was saying, that he's going to be kaina even ba'inus. And then Yevama forced him and he had relations with her. Now, shneyem manusim, that explains the case of the Mishnah, that it was against his will, wasn't against her will, she forced him. But what's the case where it was brought before the Shnei Manusin de Rab Chia? The Gemara before quoted the Braisa. Rab Chia said that even if both the husband and the wife, the Yavam and the Yevama, they were both Einis. Heichidami, what's the case that they were both Einis and it would be Kaina, the mitzvah is done? When he intended to be with his wife, and then after that, now Goyim came along and took him and connected him to his wife. Before, in the beginning of the Gemara was saying that Goyim came and forced him, Goyim came and forced him, and he had to have intent, ein kishiyel ledas. So therefore his intent is something that he can't blame the Goyim anymore. But if here in this case, he did have intent, but his intent was to be with his wife. And then after that, the Goyim came and forced him to be together with his Yevamah. In such a case, that force is considered to be an Einis, and therefore that's the Chiddush here, that still the mitzvah took effect. Talk to Gemara, what's Bechlal, the source of this whole thing? Mina and Emili, from where do we know this? That even if it was Ba'ainis, still the mitzvah is done. Tana Rabbana, we learned in the Braisa. Braisa Darshan is the Pasik, where it says the mitzvah of Yibum. So the Pasik says, Yivama Yava Yaleha. So what do we learn from this? Mitzvah. That it's a mitzvah to do Yibum. Rashi says it means that you have a choice, right? Yibum or Chalitza. But Yibum is the preferred mitzvah. Dava Acher, another pshat in what it says, Yivama Yava Yaleha, that it means bein b'sheigig, bein b'mezid, even if it's done b'sheigig, which means that he thinks it's his wife and now he sees it's not, or it's b'mezid, just doing it b'znus, or b'ainis, bein b'ratzen. That's what we learn from this pasuk. The Gemara immediately asks, how could you have a second pshat here? You just said in the first pshat that you learn from Yevama Yava Yaleh that this is the preferred mitzvah. So how could you say you learn from here, bein b'sheigig, bein b'ainis? Says the Gemara, no, really the first pshat you don't have to learn from here. The mitzvah, the fact that there's a preferred mitzvah to do yibum, mive'im lo yachpetze ishnafke. It's from what the pasuk says, if he does not want, then he goes and does chalitza. Ha chafetz yavim. But if he does want, he should do yibum. So from that I already see that that's the preferred mitzvah. So the pasuk when it says yivama yava yaleh is coming to say bein b'sheigig, bein b'mezid, bein b'ainis, bein b'ratzen. Tan Yedach, and another brayso, we learned more about what you see in this pasuk here, also connected to the halachas that we said in the Mishnah. When it says Yevama Yava Yaleh, that a Yevama should come and have relations with his wife, kedarka. That means in the normal, ordinary way to have relations. Then it says Ulakacha, and he takes her. That means even Shaloi kedarka. Even if he is having relations with her not in the ordinary way, he's also fulfilling the mitzvah. Then the pasuk after Yevama Yava Yaleh says V'yivma. So if we would just say v'yivim without a hey, so then I can dash it from that. Bia goymeres ba. Bia, relations, is what makes the mitzvah, that makes her his wife. V'vein kesef v'shtar goymerim ba. But to give her kesef, money, or a star, like it is by a regular kiddushin, that doesn't do anything. That doesn't make the kiddushin. But then it says v'yivma with an added hey. That means balkarcha. That even if it's against her will. Not only before we said b'sheigig b'ainis, that's regarding him, but here we learn from v'yivma, even against her will. That's the conclusion of the second braisa. Now the Gemara asks on this. It said before in the first braisa, Dava Acha, Yevame Yava Yaleh, that we learn from the words Yevame Yava Yaleh, Bein B'sheigig Chulu, that even against his will, or even if it's B'sheigig and so on, but Vaha Pikte L'Kedarka. So the question now is, but in the second braisa, it brings the very same pasuk of Yevame Yava Yaleh to say that if a person has relations with his Yevame in the normal way, that it's going to be kaina. So how could you learn from one pasuk two different things? So the Gemara says, no, hahu, the fact that if a Yevama does the mitzvah with the Yavam in the regular way, that it's kaina, that we learn from another pasuk. Mila hakim la'achiv shem nafke. That it says the whole point of a Yavam having relations with his Yevama is to give birth to a child, and to give a name for the brother. And what do we see from that? B'makim shemekim shein. When a person has normal relations with his Yevama, that's the potential to give birth, to be able to give a name for the brother. If it's Shalei Kedarka, he's not going to give birth, and therefore he's not going to fulfill the Lahakim Lachav Shem. So from there I learned that the Yibum is Kedarka. So V'chiyasa Kra, so when it says the pasuk Yivama Yava Yaleh, the main thing it's coming to teach me is Bein B'sheigig, Bein B'mezid, Bein B'ainis, Bein B'ratzen. Even if it's B'sheigig, and all these different scenarios regarding the Yavam, even against as well. Gufet, go back to the point before that we said, Rav Yehuda said, Yashan loikana b'yavimta. Person that has relations with his Yivame when he's asleep, so then it does not take effect. Makra, because the pasuk says Yevamo Yavai Aleh. Yavai means he comes, not that while he's asleep someone else attaches him to his wife. Ad the mechaven la l'shem bia. He has to have the kavana that it should be l'shem bia. And according to Rashi, that means that he has to be in a situation where he's a bar das. Fragt the Gemara, but vatanya in a brayso we learned ben ben yashan that the mitzvah could be accomplished whether he's awake, even if he's asleep. Says the Gemara, no, eime ben eira ben yeshena. You have to read that brayso not when he's awake or asleep. He has to be awake because he's doing the mitzvah. But it's when his wife, when the Yevama is awake, or even if she's asleep, the mitzvah is done. Fragt the Gemara, but there's another brayso. Vatanya, there's a brayso that clearly says ben er hu, ben yashan hu, that the mitzvah is even if he's awake or even if he's asleep. So you can't say that it's talking about her. And then it says afterwards, ben eira hi, ben yeshena hi. So here we clearly see that he does the mitzvah even if he's asleep. And says the Gemara, and that brayso that it says even if he's asleep, what it's speaking about is b'misnamnen. He's dozing off. He's awake, sort of, and not awake. Hechidami misnamnen. What does that mean? Omar Rav Ashi, nim v'loy nim. He's sleeping, but he's not sleeping. Tir v'loy tir. He's awake, but he's not awake. And that means going to karu levani. If they call out to this person, he answers. But he can't respond to anything that takes thinking or logic of something. He won't be able to answer you. But if you remind him about something and he has to say yes or no about something that you remind him about, he could answer yes or no, but not more than that. So he's sort of half awake, half asleep. That's when the brayso said that you can, if the mitzvah is done in such a situation, that the mitzvah is done. Gufe, to go back to what it said before, Omar Rabbe said, Nofal min agag v'nitka, person falls down, he's blown down from a wind, from a roof, and he falls down onto a Yevame, and then, so the brayso said, Rabbe that is said, Chayev barba dvarim, he'll be chayev to pay the four things, but it'll be Yevimtoi leikana. With the Yevame, he's not kaina. So what are the four things he's chayev? Benezek, he's chayev to pay any nezek if he harmed her in such a way that now her value goes down. Nezek is measured by when you sell a person in the marketplace as a slave or as a maidservant, and you look at the value before this and after to see how did her value was decreased. With tsar, you have to pay her for the pain that he caused her, how much a person was ready to go through this pain and to be paid for that. B'sheves, any loss of work because of this, and b'ripoy, and medical bills. Those are the four things you have to pay. Usually there's a fifth thing you have to pay. When you embarrass someone, there's also, the pasuk says you have to usually pay for that. But here, in such a case where a wind blew him down, he doesn't have to pay for baishes. Why? Because the Gemara says, and this is in Baba Kama, the whole sugya there about this, Ein chayev ala baishes achi yiskaven. When it comes to baishes, you only chayev to pay for embarrassing someone if you did it intentionally. Over here it happened unintentionally, so you're not chayev for this. Rava said, a person was intending to attach himself or to stick himself into a wall, and instead he had relations with his Yevama, like kana. That's not a mitzvah. He's not kaina at all, because he didn't have any kavanah to have relations with a human being b'chlal. So he had no kavanah for the mitzvah at all. La'tiach b'behemet, to have relations with a behemet, v'tiach b'yevama, and instead it was with a Yevama, then kana. Then he is kaina because he had kavanah to have relations with something, with not with a wall, with a behemoth. It's kaina. The hakamechaven l'shem bia ba'olam. It is a kavanah for bia. So even if it's not a bia with the yevama, it is going to be kaina. So this means, even though we said before in the Mishnah, bein bainis, bein beratzim, bein b'shegig, bein b'mezid, but there has to be at least a basic kavanah l'shem bia. Then it said in the Mishnah, echad hama'ara, that this halacha of the mitzvah of Yibum, and the same thing also the Mishnah said regarding all the other arayas, you over on the arayas as well, even if it's only the beginning of the act of the bia without completing it. So here will be a long sugya about this. What's the source of this halacha? Both beneged to Yevame and beneged to all the other arayas, that it's even for hara, even for the beginning of the act. So what's the source for this? Shenemar. So he brings a pasuk that it says by Yanida. V'isha sheyishka v'esesha es dava, es isha dava, a woman that's a nida, v'gila es arvasa, and he exposes her, es mekaira hera. Her source he uncovered. So hera is this halashon that's used to say that even the beginning of the act that he exposed her is already aveda. Mikan lahara menat. This is the source that the relations with a nida is even just hara. So the Gemara, okay, ashkechan nida. This is the source regarding a nida. Shar arayis minayin. From where do I know that the same applies to the other arayis as well, and that the isser is hara? Chiteime. Now, if you want to say neiluf minida, let's learn out from a nida. But the Gemara says no. There's a chumrah you can't learn from a nida. Why not? Ma'ale nida shekei metame as bayala. By nida, there's a unique chumrah that when her husband has relations with her while she's a nida, he becomes tameh like her. Becomes tameh for 7 days. So therefore, you can't learn from there. Ella, says the Gemara, there's another source we can learn out from. Asya me'eshes ach. You can learn out this halach of hara from eshes ach, that a person is not allowed to have relations with his brother's wife. And over there's also a pasuk where you see that it's even hara. Over there, the pasuk says, V'isha sheyikach eshes achiv nidahi. The Gemara concludes that you're not allowed because she's a nida. What does this mean? V'chi eshes achiv la'ilam nidahi. Person's brother's wife is a nida, that's why he shouldn't have relations with her. So why does the pasuk add nida? Ella ke nida. The pasuk is saying nida, that this issa here is compared to nida. Ma nida bara. Just like by nida the Torah says the issa is even just hara. Af eshesach bara. So too by the erva of eshesach, the issa is only with hara. So maybe we could learn from eshesach. From eshesach we could learn to all other arayas that the isser is with hara. So here again the Gemara says there's a unique chumrah that you find by this erva of eshesach. Ma'ale eshesach is a unique kind of erva. She can be yadei l'rabbis. A person, he can add to this erva as much as he wants. If your brother marries one wife, he decides to marry a second, third, fourth, fifth wife, he marries as many wives as he wants, they all become aser. By every erva, the erva is what it is. You can't add to it more than what it is. But Issa Eishes Ach, the biyada, he has the option to come and marry more wives and can be more and more. The boy Mekadesh V'Azal Ki Alpha. If you want, you can go and marry more wives, up to 1,000 wives, and so on. So therefore, this is a unique kind of an erva that it's in his hands, and he can add more to this. So maybe there we're more machmer, benigay to this kind of an erva that even hara is aser. But you can't learn out from here to other arayis, which are what it is, where you can't add more to it. So the Gemara brings a third source. Elo asya ma'chaysav v'achayseim. We could learn this concept that the isra of arayis is even just with hara from the erva of achaysav and achayseim. The chsiv over there it says ve'ervas achaysimcha v'achayis avicha loisegale. And the pasuk adds, Ki es she'eroi hera. Your relative, you uncovered. The term hera is the source of hara, that even the beginning of the act would be asa. So I could learn from there to all other arayis. So again the Gemara says, from there alone you can't learn either. There's a unique chumrah that you find over there, so I can refute this. When it comes to the brother of your father, the brother of your mother, shekain iser haba me'elav. This is an iser that comes on its own. So therefore, even if you could learn from here all other arayis that are isurim that come on their own, meaning that these are natural relatives to you. So yeah, from here you could learn to those kinds of arayis. But how about those kinds of arayis that are not natural relatives to you? Those arayis that become an issa erva because of through marriage or through something else that was done. So for those arayis, you still don't have a source that hara would be asar. Okay, so now we have three sources the Gemara tried to learn from Nida, from Eishes Ach, your brother's wife, or from Achais Av or Achaisein. You can't learn from each one of them individually. So the Gemara now will try to learn from two together, which is always called Atzad Hashava. Says the Gemara. So now, from one of these, as you explained, we can't learn out. So Taisi Chada Mitarti. Maybe we should learn one or all the Arayis from two together. So the Gemara says, let's see, Mahai Taisi, from which two together would we be able to learn out? Taisi me'eshesach v'achaysav, me'eshesach v'achaysav v'achayseim. Should we learn out from eshesach and also from achaysav and achayseim? Right. So the way Atzad Hashava always works is you have a chumrah, which is the reason you can't learn out from one. But if there's another and they don't share the same chumrah, so then I say the chumrah is not anymore a refutation for this limud, because the chumrah is not the reason for this halacha. For haraya, there's another case that does not have that same chumrah, and the halacha still applies. So then I say instead it's the common denominator that causes the halacha. What's the common denominator here? That the Eishes Ach and Achais Av and Achaiseim are both an erva. And by both of these arayis, the Torah says that the Isra is even by hara, so therefore it should apply to any other erva as well. But the Gemara says, no, I can't learn out from these two together, because there's a pirche that is similar by both of them. Both of these are arayis that are based on the fact that this is a relative of yours. So that's why it's aser. But what the Rashi says, but the problem is, how would I know b'negei to the issa of a erva, which is not a relative? Eishes ish. Any Eishes ish is a erva, and it's not anything of a relative. How would I know that there's the issa even with hara? Ella, says the Gemara, so let's try another two. Teisim min nida v'achaysav v'achayseim. So let's learn out from nida together with achaysav and achayseim. So a nida is not necessarily a relative. Any woman which is a nida you can't have relations with. And a chayseim is a case of which is a relative. So I can learn out from these two together to every erva that it's asur for hara. Says the Gemara, no, there's again a chumrah that they share that refutes this limud. Ma'alahanach, these two together, shekain issa ba me'elof. Both the issa of a nida and the issa of a chaysav and a chayseim is not a issa based on something that you did, that someone got married, but it's just a issa that's there on its own without you doing anything. So how could I learn from here to any other issa of a erva where there's something that you did? There was a kedushin that was done that created the issa of erva. Ella, says the Gemara, Taisi, let's put together another two. Minida ve'eshes ach. Nida and eshes ach, over here, the mai parches. Here there is no perche. That they are equal in any way, that there's a same chumrah by both of them that you shouldn't be able to learn out from here. A nida is a woman that's not a relative, and that's a erva you can learn from there even to an eshes ish. Eshes ach is a nida, which is the kind of an erva which is a relative, but it's also a kind of erva which is based on an action that you did, that your brother married this wife. From here I should be able to learn out to everywhere. Says the Gemara, no, there is a pircha on this as well. What's the pircha? What's unique about these two is there's no heter for these two in the lifetime of the one that's making this isser. The nida, she's the one that makes the isser. She's flowing blood. While she's flowing blood, so there's no heter. And the same thing also, when you get to Eishesach, while your brother is alive and married to his wife, there's no heter for this at all. Taima be'eshes ish, so you wouldn't be able to learn out from those two to eshes ish. Sheken yesh la heter b'chai yisra. The isser, the erva of eshes ish, is a lighter kind of an erva. Why? Because if this eshes ish divorces his wife, even while he's still alive, so now there's no erva anymore. So because it's a lighter kind of a isser, so how could you learn out from these two nida and eshes ach to eshes ish? So the Gemara asks on the way this pircha was asked of here. There's something that's not clear. So he says to him, how did you ask this pircha? This pircha that was just said over here. I mean, it wasn't Ravina that asked this pircha, but Rav Acha Bereid Ravika asked this pircha. He says it doesn't make sense. Otu nida ve'eshes ach. Is it true that both regarding a nida and your brother's wife, b'chaye oisran hu de'ein lehem heter, that in the lifetime of the one that's making the issa, there's no heter? What does that mean? Avala acha mikan yesh lehem heter, but afterwards there is a heter. That's not the right way to put it. Nida b'yayim etalim. The point is different. By a nida, it all depends on the days. Meaning that if she saw blood, so then after that she has to wait 7 days. That's when the isser goes off. It's not nothing to do with when she's alive or not alive. It has to do with the time of 7 days that she has to be clean without seeing any blood. And similar also when it comes to Eishes Ach. So what did we say? Eishes Ach, as long as your brother is still alive and married to his wife, so then she's going to be yasser to you. But once he passes away, she'll be mutter to you. Not necessarily. It depends if he had any children. If he passes away and he had no children, then his wife becomes your Yevamos and she's mutter to you. If he had children, even when he passes away, she'll still be yasser to you. So why are you using this lashon over here? Ella, the Gemara says, you're right, we just have to, the pircha is a bit different. The pircha here is as follows. Ma'al nida ve'eshesach, what's unique about the erva of a nida and the erva of eshesach is shekain ein oisran matiran. The source of the one that's asering you he doesn't have any koyach. There's nothing that he can do. The nida, while she's flowing blood, and also the brother, the Eishesach, it's not in his hands to be matter, this wife. Even if he divorces her, there's nothing he can do about it. That's the kind of erva both of these are. By by an Eishes Ish, the one that's causing the Isser, because he married this woman, it's in his hands. He could decide to divorce her, and it's in his hands to take off this Isser. So therefore, it's not as strong as an Erve. So the bottom line is, the Gemara just proved over here that from any of these sources that you want to try to learn out, this Isser, that it applies even by Ara, you can't learn out from Nida alone, from Eishes Ach alone, from Achais Av or Achais Eim alone. You can't learn out from any of these two together. So where is the source that Hara is a Isser that it applies by all Arayis, that even with Hara? Ella, therefore the Gemara says, it's learned from another place, from a Hekesh. Omer Rav Yoina, so Rav Yoina says, V'itaymer Rav Huna Bereder Rav Yeshua, Omakra, the Pasuk, by the end of all the Arayis says, by the way, these are Psukim over here in this week's Parsha that we're learning here about, in Parshas Achrei, and also in next week's Parsha, Kedoshim. So the pasuk says, "Ki kol ashayasa mikol hatoyeves ha'ela." Anyone will do that. Any of these abominable acts, v'nichasu anafashis ha'isais, that they are all chayav kares. So the Torah puts it all together in one pasuk. What does this mean? Hukshu kol ha'arayas kulan le nida. Over here, after it mentions over there the nida as well, and then it puts them all in one pasuk. So it compares everything to nida. Ma nida behara, just like regarding a nida, the isser of the relation with the nida is even with hara, afkal hara. So to kol hatayevos, all of the other arayis, including a Eishes Ish, and everything is also aser only, even that is with hara. That's the conclusion. So this is what's known in the Gemara as Hakesha de Rabbi Yoina. This is the Hekesh of Rabbi Yoina. This was once mentioned here before in the Masechta. The Gemara brought this Hekesh that you compare all the Arayis to one another, and this Hekesh is used for different things. Here we're using it for this, that the Isser is even just with Hara. Okay, that's the source. Now the Gemara goes back to the Psukim that it quoted before. Before we quoted the pasuk by the Isser, by the Erva of Eishes Ach, the Torah uses the term Nida. So why does the Torah have to use there the term Nida? Before we wanted to say it's to teach me that the Isser is even Bahara, but now we're saying we have a different source for that. So why is the Torah comparing Eishes Ach to a Nida? Says the Gemara, look at the Rav Huna, it's the drash of Rav Huna. The Omer Rav Huna said, Remez liyevame min ha-Torah minayim. Where do I see in the Torah a hint for a Yevame? So the Gemara immediately explains, what does this mean? Minayin? You want to know where you have in the Torah the mitzvah of Yevame? Haksiv, that's a clear pasuk. Yevame yaveh yaled. There's a whole parsha of Yevame. So that's not his question. Ella, rather, what he was asking was, Remez liyevame sha'asura b'chaye baila minayim. From where do I see in the Torah that your brother's wife, while your brother is still alive, that there's an Isser here? Meaning, even if you divorced his wife. But if he's still alive, it's us for you to marry your brother's wife. So, fragt the Gemara, Hai svarihi. This is, you don't need a pasuk for this. This is a svara. Why? Midam rachmana, because the Torah says, La'achar mises baila sharia. Here the Torah says that only after the husband passes away and he had no children, then you're allowed to have relations with him, and only then there's a mitzvah of yibun. So meklal, so don't you understand from that automatically, the bechaye baila, that when the husband is still alive, asura, that it's forbidden, even if you divorced her. So you don't need a special pasuk for that. Says the Gemara, no, not necessarily. Logically, not necessarily would you know this, because vidilme la'acham, he says by law mitzvah. Maybe what the Torah is saying is, if your brother passed away without children, so then it's a mitzvah actually to have relations with his wife. And but b'chaye by law, but let's say he divorced her, and so then maybe the shus, maybe it's allowed even if it's not a mitzvah. Inami, or maybe I would say la'acham, he says by law in. After your husband passed away, so then you're allowed. But b'chaye baila loy, but you're not allowed. But what does that mean? V'lav abom klal asay. But this is not allowed. With the Torah ever clearly says that you shouldn't have relations with her after your brother divorced her. So, but it's only based on an asay. Because you learn it from this that it says Yevama Yavi Alel, that when your brother passed away, so then it's a mitzvah. So from that you understand that if it did not pass away, so then it's not a mitzvah asay. So then that's a law that comes from an asay, and that's only an asay. So therefore, over here the Torah says O Makrov Ish Ashiyikach Es Eishes Achiv Nidahi, that I learn from here that as follows: V'chi isha eishes achav, that is the wife of your brother. Nida, is she a nida? Why does the Torah add the words nida? Ela kin nida. It's saying here nida, comparing it to a nida. Ma nida, just like a nida. Avo b'sheyesh leheta la'acham mikan. even though later she has a heter when she becomes clean. But b'shas yisura b'kares, at the time when she is aser, what level of a isser is it? It's a level of isser of kares. Af eshesach nami, so too when it comes to eshesach, ava b'sheyesh la heter la'achem mikan, even though later, if your brother would pass away and he had no children, then there would be a heter. But b'chaye baila, when he's still alive and the isser is there, what kind of a isser is it? B'kares. It's a isser of kares, not only an asay, but the isser is kares. That's why I had to say over there the word nida. Now the Gemara goes back to another pasuk that it mentioned before. Ela hara d'chsiva gabe achaysav achayseim. The Gemara quoted before that the Torah spells out clearly by the two arayas of achaysav and achayseim that the erva is even aser with hara. Why does it have to say that? Lamali. Why do you need it if we have before the hekesh of Rabbi Yaina? Why does it have to mention there specifically? Says the Gemara, that's for some that teach me something completely different. This is what Ravina asked of Rava. When you have two males that have a relation with one another, and over there the relation was only with hara, the beginning of the act. So over there, is that asur or not? Mahu. What's the din? So the Gemara says, there's no question on this. Why not? Because even by the relations of two males, the Torah writes, Mishkevei Isha. What does that mean? That we compare it to Mishkevei Isha just like the relations with a woman. So it's the same thing. Just like we said by the relations with a woman, it's even with hara, it should be the same with a zachar. So what do you need a special limit for that? What was this question, B'chlal? Ela, the Gemara says the question is Amara behema, the beginning of the relations of the act when it's with a behema. Mahu over there, the question is, what's the halacha? Is that the isser or not? Amalei, so he answered him, so that over here we learn from what it says, this term of hara by achaysav and achayseim. And I say as follows, Im einoi inyan lahara d'chsive gabe achaysav achayseim. Over there, when the Torah writes this term hara by the erva of achaysav and achayseim, and that's an extra pasuk. It's not needed there because you already learn it out from the hekesh of Rabbi Yaina, the asiyah b'akeshem of Rabbi Yaina, taneu inyan lahara de behema. So we instead use it for hara regarding a behema. This is a concept you have in the Gemara many times in ein inyan, that the Torah writes something in one place, and if it's not needed there, we use it for something totally different. Frag the Gemara, why is the Torah writing this halacha of hara regarding a behema by a chaysav and a chayseim? Nachti, let's see. Behema, person that has a relation with a behema, chayv mises bezdin. That's a isser that you chayv mises bezdin for it. So my time miksiv la hara dida. Why is the Torah writing the halacha of hara that would apply for this gabi chayv krisis by the case of the erva of a chayis av or a chayis aim, which is actually an erva that there's no mises bezdin for, but it's only a chi of krisis. Lichtov gabi mises bezdin. Even if the Torah is going to write it in a different place, why doesn't it write it by another mises bezdin? V'neil of mises bezdin and mises bezdin, and we would learn it out from another place, which is a mises bezdin. Says the Gemara, the reason is because Aidi the Kule Kral Ledrasha Asi. When the Torah writes the Isser of the Erva of Achais Av and Achais Aim, the entire pasuk is extra. As Rashi brings over here, the reason why the entire pasuk is extra is because the Isser, this Erva of Achais Av and Achais Aim, it says it in this week's parasha, in Parshas Acharei, and then in next week's parasha, in Parshas Kedoshim, it repeats the whole thing again. So it says it twice. So the whole pasuk is extra. So, and the whole pasuk therefore is coming for a drasha. The drasha asi. So this whole pasuk is written for a drasha. So ksiv beinami ha milse ledrasha. So therefore in this pasuk, since this whole pasuk is being written for a drasha, it also wrote in this inyan of hara, which is a drasha regarding a relation with a behemoth. My drasha, where do we see that whole pasuk is extra and is being written for a drasha? The Tanya will learn in the Braisa. When it says in the pasuk, Ervas, Achais, Avicha, Leise Gale, what this is coming to teach me is, it's an extra pasuk. Bein min ha'av, bein min ha'eim. That's the sister of your father, whether with being a sister, we share the same father or share the same mother. Now the Braisa will explain why you need this drasha here. You tell me that it's coming to teach me bein min ha'av, bein min ha'eim. Or maybe not. Ela min ha'av, maybe if it's only a sister with share the same father, v'loy min ha'eim, not sharing the same mother. And Vidinu, so the Braisa says, no. I'll tell you that it's actually actually logical to say that it doesn't make a difference, Beim and Av and Beim and Aim, in both the cases that should be Aser. Why? V'dinu chayev, that you should be chayev, because, again, v'dinu, it would make sense to compare and say as follows. Chayev kan, v'chayev ba chaysai. There's the erva we're speaking about over here, which is ervas achaysa vicha, and then there's the erva of not having relations with your sister. Ma chaysai, just like when it comes to the erva of a sister, that's beim and av, beim and aim. Whether she's a sister, a paternal sister, a maternal sister, in both cases it would be aser. Afkan, so too over here, by the erva of achayis avicha, beim and av, beim and aim. I would compare it to that to say that over here as well, it's both, whether it's ben av or ben aim, it doesn't make a difference, the same thing. So that would be a reason to say why I should say that I don't make a distinction between if it's mina av or mina aim. Or now the Braisa says this is not so clear, because there's another case to compare this to. Klach lederech zu, maybe you should compare it to something else. There's a different erva I could compare. The erva we're speaking about over here again is achayis avicha. Maybe I could compare this erva of achayis avicha to another erva, and that is Chayiv kan, here achayis avicha is an erva, and v'chayiv bidoi dosai. And then there's another kind of an aunt. Not an aunt which is achayis avicha, but an aunt by marriage. The wife of your father's brother. So over there, by a aunt, it also asks as an erva. And maybe I should compare to there. Ma doi dosai, when it comes to an aunt, mina'ah v'loi mina'im. Over there, it's only an aunt from the father, which the Gemara will soon learn the source from this, and not if it's from the mother, not if if it's your father's brother, that it's only a brother because they share the same mother. So afkan, maybe I should say over here regarding the erva that we're speaking about, which is achayis avicha, only mina'ah v'loi mina'im. So we have two different arayas to compare the erva of achayis avicha to. So who do I compare it to? So the Gemara says, or the Braisa here continues and says, Nira lemidaime. Let's see to who it's more similar. Donin, maybe there's a svara to say that I compare is rabami elov, mi is rabami elov. I should compare the erva of achayis avicha to the erva of your sister, because they're both arayas that are there naturally, not through any marriage that you did. So maybe I should compare those two. And you don't compare it to an aunt that only became your aunt by marriage. That it doesn't come on its own. But then there's another svara to say that I should compare it to an aunt. Maybe I could say as follows. That I compare a relative from your father to a relative from your father, and we don't learn out from mamish, your sister. That's a much closer relationship. That's your direct sister, your relation, not through your father. So maybe I should learn from your aunt. So Bekitzer, it's not clear where I would learn it out from, and therefore, regarding this halacha here, which is the erva of achayis avicha, is that only if it's paternally or even maternally, if they share the same father or the same mother, it's not clear where you learn it out, what the halacha is that. So therefore the Gemara says, Talmud loymar, that's where we have an extra pasuk that repeats this again, and says, ervas achayis avicha loy segale, beimena av, beimena aim. And it says again, ervas achayis imecha, the erva, the sister of your mother, loy segale, that's also an extra pasuk, and beimena av, beimena aim. So those are the two psukim that are extra, as I mentioned before. Rashi says, because the Torah says this in Parshas Achrei, he repeats it again in Parshas Kedoshim, so it's extra, you learn out from there. The Gemara says, regarding this last point here, these two halachas that we just said, it says it both by a father's sister and by a mother's sister. Why does it have to say it by both? Why can't I learn them out from one another? So Rabavo explains, no, I do need to teach it by both. Tzrichi, the Torah has to say it. If it would teach me this halacha by a father's sister, so then I would say that's more chomer. Why? Sheken yeshlo chayis. When it comes to a father's sister, the chayis, which means the family, the yichus of a person, always goes by the father. When it comes to the family and the yichus of a person does not go by his mother. So the relation there is not as close. So over there I would not compare it. Say maybe there the issa does not apply to whether it's mina av or mina aim. On the other hand, though, there's a certain more closeness that there is by a sister to your mother. There's a bigger closeness that a person has to his mother than the father. Shekaim vadois. When it comes to a mother, we know, we can see clearly, physically, who his mother is, who this child was born from. When it comes to this erva that's based on the fact that it's your father's sister, that's different. Aim that by a chayis av, aim a light. Maybe I should say over there that you never know 100% who the father is. It's not something you could 100% determine. So if so, the relation is not as close. So therefore, tzriche. That's why it has to say both cases for a chayis av and for a chayis aim, because each one of them has their own chumrah. Now the Gemara goes back to a point that was mentioned before, which is regarding an aunt. It said before an aunt, which is a wife of your father's brother, that the Isser is only if it's your father's brother, paternally, they share the same father. We said before that the aunt is only aser if it's mina'av and not mina'aim. How do we know? Minole, what's the source for this? Rava says, because asya doidoi, we compare the aunt that it says here to doidoi that it says by another pasuk. Ksivacha ervas doidoi gila. That you will megala the erva of your doida, of your aunt or your uncle. Ksiv hasam, and then there's another pasuk where it says, and this is speaking about redeeming an eved that got sold to a guy. Oy doidai, oy ben doidai yigaleno. His uncle or his cousin should redeem him. So mala alon mina'av, just like over there, it's talking about your uncle that it's from your father. V'loy mina'aim, not your uncle when you share the same mother. Avkan mina'av. So to over here, when it says the Isra of the Erva of Deidasai, it means mina'av, v'loy mina'aim. And the Hassam, you know what? How do we know over there by that pasuk when it's talking about your uncle redeeming you that it's only your uncle from the father? How do you know that it's mina'av? Amakra, because over there the pasuk says mi mishpachta yigaleno. Only from your family is the pasuk speaking about that come to redeem you. Mishpachas av karuya mishpacha. That the family that is family because of the father, that's called family. Rashi here brings from the pasuk where when Moshe Rabbeinu was counting the Yidden, so the pasuk says, "V'yisyaldu al mishpachaisam lebeis avaisam." The pasuk says that the beis avaisam, that's what's called family. Mishpachas ein akruya mishpacha. The mishpacha of the mother regarding this is not considered to be a mishpacha. Okay, so that's the source for this, that the doidasa is only min ha'av.